Welcome to the Economy Magazine at I-24 News, where we provide a daily view on world markets and the global economy. I'm Natalie Ehrlich. Coming up today, the Syrian Civil War spoils a lifeline for apple farmers in the Golan. And EdTech takes the spotlight in Israel. Let's start now with the headlines. Well, after 5 consecutive days of steep losses in China, the Shanghai Stock Exchange closed up 5.3% on Thursday. The Nikkei stock average ended 1.1% higher. Australia's S&P ASX 200 gained 1.2%, and South Korea's Kospi gained 0.7%. Well, European stocks also rebounded strongly on Thursday. The FTSE 100 ended 2.22% higher, the DAX up 2.80%, and the French CAC 2.67% higher. Well, U.S. futures also higher on the day, the Dow indicating gains of about 140 points before the open. Amid the slide in oil prices, French oil giant Total has agreed to sell some of its gas pipeline assets in the UK's North Sea to North Sea midstream partners for £585 million. Earlier this year, Total, Europe's second largest oil firm, unveiled a plan to cut investments and jobs. North Sea Midstream is an affiliate of a U.S.-based private equity firm, ArcLight Capital. And Israeli cell phone company Golan Telecom is said to be exploring M&A in hopes of consolidating that market. Ironically, Golan entered the market after the communications minister Moshe Kahlon helped expand the market from 3 firms to 6. As a result, consumer prices fell dramatically. Still, analysts at the time had cautioned that Israel's tiny market may not have enough room for so many telecom players. Well, in more auspicious news for China, Toyota says it will gradually restart work at its Tianjin plant following the 2 deadly blasts 2 weeks ago. 67 Toyota workers had been injured there, as well as thousands of vehicles damaged in the 2 chemical explosions at China's port city. Well, Toyota employees reportedly would begin preparations for work on Thursday. The blast there killed 139 people, injuring hundreds of others. And New York Fed Chief William Dudley said on Wednesday the case for a rate hike in September was now less compelling following the tumult in China and world markets the last few days. As the FOMC's vice chairman, Dudley is considered an influential voice. He also is reportedly a close ally of the Fed chair, Janet Yellen. Well, the next FOMC policy meeting is set to take place September 16th through 17th. And for more insight on world markets, we are joined now on Skype by Lawrence Schreiber of Clarity Capital. Thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure, Natalie. Nice to be here.
Well, we've recently been seeing tremendous volatility in global equity markets. What has happened and what is causing this?
Absolutely. It's been a very impressive series of moves over the last week. Literally, it's just been a week since things started moving. If you take a big picture, it's kind of to be expected. We've had a 6-year almost continuous rally in developed market equities, U.S., Europe, and parts of Asia. It's unusual to have such a long period of time go by without a significant pullback, and typically it's healthy for markets to pull back from time to time, which is why people actually call it a correction. They think it's just a rebalancing of markets. If you ask what the drivers were, people really got nervous about China. Was a major one. We started to see some less positive economic numbers, not negative, but just less positive. And equities in China got really put under stress as a result. And people started wondering, does that mean the global economy is slowing down? We're seeing oil prices lower, which might indicate that. And it led to a kind of panic selling around the world.
Well, you mentioned this kind of correction here. Are these types of dramatic moves normal?
Absolutely, they are. We see throughout every cycle multiple corrections. And typically people define a correction as at least a 10% move or greater from the most recent high to current levels. We get those from time to time. What made this one unusual was to see a 10% drop. In fact, the S&P, which is the S&P 500, which is the largest index in the world, most liquid one in the U.S., moved 12% in 4 days from the highs to the lows. And that's unusual. We've only seen about 8 or 9 of those in the last 100 years. So it was a rapid move, but it wasn't necessarily bigger than what we normally expect.
Interesting. Well, what impact are we going to see in other major asset classes like bonds, commodities, from all of this volatility?
Oh, absolutely. It is a volatile period. And people have to remember that the last few years have been atypical. We're getting back into more normal market volatility. So, of course, these last 4 or 5 trading days have been unusually large, but it's not unusual for investments to move up and down over time. So we've seen those types of moves in emerging market currencies. We've seen them now in commodities as well, as I discussed, but gold as well has been fairly volatile. I think we're back into a more typical period of volatility, and we're going to expect up and down.
All right. And where do we go from here?
Oh, that's a great question. As markets were really collapsing this past Monday, our firm sent out a note to all of our clients saying, we don't think this is the end of the long-term economic cycle. This is different, we felt, and we still feel, than the 2008 period or even the 2000-2001 period, where we were recovering from a bubble. Now there's really no bubble, at least in the assets that are selling off dramatically. Things have been a little more highly valued, but not massively overvalued. So we think this is a correction. It's part of the normal course of market movements, and we would expect to kind of move back to normal signs. I wouldn't panic.
Well, Lauren Schreiber, thank you very much for bringing this to our attention.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Natalie. Thank you for having me.
Moving on now, high-ranking officials in Guatemala are caught in a major corruption case. The vice president has already been arrested, but President Molina is still in office. Shelby Weiner has this story.
A multi-million-dollar fraud case erupted in Guatemalan politics. Investigations began in April, uncovering the crime ring La Línea, a hotline used to contact a network of corrupt customs officers. Allegations have reached high-ranking officials, causing the arrest and resignation of Vice President Baldetti, who allegedly accepted $3.7 million in bribes. Now many are calling for President Pérez Molina to step down as well.
I will not resign, and I will face the corresponding legal process with all my strength.
The Guatemalan president rejects accusations of being a ringleader in the crime scheme, which reduced importers' customs duties in exchange for bribes. But UN prosecutors say they uncovered extensive evidence implicating the president.
In some of the raided sites, we discovered documents that revealed close relations between the president, the vice president, and members of the criminal organization.
Despite mounting evidence, Pérez Molina continues to refuse accusations of being corrupt.
I reject categorically being involved in the customs fraud operation or having received any money from it.
Thousands of Guatemalans have rallied in protest against the president. And in recent weeks, several of his cabinet members stood down in an act of no confidence against the leader. And now the first steps towards impeachment have begun within the Supreme Court.
We've
also proposed a preliminary hearing against the president on suspicion of his participation in these illicit activities.
The scandal comes just before the country holds general elections on September 6th. Over 50% of the country lives below the poverty line. Court actions against Guatemala's corrupt politicians could bring positive change to the country, whose poorest citizens have long been losing to the upper class. Guatemala's GDP is expected to grow 4% in 2015. Socioeconomic hopes are high for Guatemala, but first the country must overcome its current scandal.
The Syrian Civil War has killed more than 100,000 people, sparking an exodus of migrants into Europe. It's also spoiling a lifeline for apple farmers in the Golan Heights. Mohammed Al-Qasim has this story.
Here in the Golan, apples are considered an economic and social lifeline, an important source of income for a population that relies heavily on farming. The Golan Heights exports thousands of tons of apples every year. Some are sold in local markets, and 30% go to Syria, under an agreement with the Syrian Ministry of Agriculture, a way of helping farmers of the Syrian Golan. But over 4 years into the war in Syria, and with militant control of the Quneitra crossing, Exports to Syria were interrupted last year. What makes matters worse, according to farmers here, is the unfair competition from nearby settlements, as well as the European and American apples imported to Israel. Asad Safadi, an apple farmer, also runs a cooling warehouse in Majd al-Shams in the Golan Heights. He isn't very optimistic.
Unfortunately, this year the crossing point is closed. Therefore, we cannot export to Syria. In addition to this, the Israeli Ministry of Agriculture allowed the import of European and American apples. This led last year's harvest sales to stall, and we are about to start this year's harvest.
This year's apple harvest will start in a matter of days, but more than 600 tons of last year's harvest sits in coolers like this one, awaiting to be sold.
Though last year's apple harvest season was plentiful, lower prices forced farmers to extend the cooling period in hopes that prices would rise. The harvest season isn't what it used to be, where family members and friends would gather to pick their products. For many, apple farming doesn't even cover the production cost. This farmer fears his crop is at stake.
This year's harvest is down, but no buyers. Apples on the ground and no takers. Many farmers left their apples on the trees or bulldozed the trees.
With the new Jewish New Year approaching and Islam's Eid al-Adha, demand for the fruit is expected to increase prices. There is still a chance to salvage this year's harvest.
Harvest season used to carry with it joy and hope for the people of the Golan, but with the economic difficulties and the war in Syria, people have very little hope for the future. Muhammad Al-Qasim, I-24 News.
Well, on set now to discuss the latest trends in education technology, we are joined by Dr. Jacob Dayan. Thank you so much for being with us.
Your pleasure.
Well, you recently attended this Edu Action conference. Tell us the highlight.
Well, yesterday there was this Edu Action conference in Golan. A lot of people attended, discussed the future trends in education. There was a special exhibit over there of Classroom of the Future, where few Israeli education technologies companies presented what they can offer to the education sector.
Well, what are some of the international trends in this sphere?
First of all, the international right now in EdTech is kind of some people say it's a hype. In the last 2 quarters in the United States, about $1.4 billion were invested in new educational technologies companies, startups, etc., which is 96% increase over the amount of investments in 2014. In Israel, we are not seeing this trend yet. We have about 100 Israeli technology companies that are doing educational technologies solutions, but we are far away from actually the potential of this sector in Israel.
Interesting. Why do you think that's the case?
There are numerous reasons for that. One reason is that the Israeli market is very small. There's also the issue that the Israeli market is very, very controlled and over-regulated by the Ministry of Education, which is something that prevents educational technologies companies to flourish. There is also a tendency that there are other sectors which are much more appealing to the investors than educational technologies, and this is something that we are trying to change.
However, in the U.S., it seems that they are excited about this area.
In the U.S., they are very excited about this. In the U.S., actually, this is something that started about 6 years ago, and it's almost doubling on every year. And this is something that today all the economies around the world looking at technology as something that will make the change in education that everyone is expecting to see. Everyone today is talking about the need to revolutionize education, to change education, and there's kind of a consensus that you can't do it without using technology and using it in the right way in order to make a change in education.
Well, what is the profit potential of this business like?
I'm trying to be very, very modest about the Israeli market. Right now, the estimates is that there are about $30 million export for the Israeli education technology sector. If we can multiply that and reach, let's say, $300 million in 5 years' time, this is a huge difference for the market, not only for the economy in Israel, but also for the educational technologies, for the educational sector inside Israel. Because the way that we see it, the more that companies are profitable and sustainable and they compete on international markets, they can actually bring into the local market solutions which are credible, which are received by other educational systems around the world and can make a change in the local market.
Fascinating. Thank you very much for being with us. That wraps up our show today. Stay tuned tomorrow for more business coverage. I'm Natalie Ehrlich. Thank you very much for watching.
Thank you.